Hi, I'm Matt Grossmann. I'm the director of the Institute for Public Policy and Social Research and a political science professor at Michigan State University. My wife and I also own a bookstore cafe in Lansing, in Michigan's capital. This is my second book with Dave Hopkins. Our first book was called Asymmetric Politics, and this is a bit of an extension.
Hi, I'm Dave Hopkins. I'm an associate professor of political science at Boston College, and this is my fourth book, second book co-authored, as Matt said, with Matt.
Polarized by Degrees is about the increasing education divide between the political parties in the United States and all of the implications that it has for the way that the parties present themselves to voters and changes in the views of Americans about the role of expertise in policymaking, about the direction of society, all having to do with this big change in the electorates and the coalitions of the parties, where college-educated voters are moving towards the Democrats and less educated white voters are moving towards the Republicans.
Well, this idea of the diploma divide is becoming very important in the minds of a lot of analysts and scholars in American politics. And so we thought that it made a really good subject for a comprehensive analysis. But we also thought that a lot of the discussion of the so-called diploma divide in the sort of political media often focuses very much just on elections. And in the United States, we have a very election-obsessed political media, so that's not a surprise. And we have a lot of elections in this country, and they're very important. We wanted to extend our reach beyond just looking at elections. We do talk a lot about elections in this book and which voters are voting for which party and how that's changed and how that affects the electoral map of the United States and which party is likely to win in different parts of the country. We also think that a big part of the story is beyond, the end of elections, when elections are over and governing begins. Because in our view and in our argument, the Democrats have become more and more the party of governing by experts, a technocratic approach and vision of governing, where the idea is that people who are well educated have sort of a special authority and should be given should be empowered basically to make public policy for the country. And the Republicans more and more represent a sort of backlash to the idea of expert-led governance, a suspicion of expert-led governance. The parties are also really changing in the way they relate to other social institutions, which are by and large dominated by highly educated people. And so a party that is more and more the party of the well-educated, the Democrats, is also a party that views itself more and more kind of aligned with the mainstream media, the educational system, both higher ed and K through 12, the scientific community, and even much of corporate America. Sort of areas of American society where people with college degrees and graduate degrees sort of hold a lot of power. And again, we see a real marked trend on the Republican side of aversion to and suspicion of those institutions, and belief that those institutions are run by elitist cultural progressives who are using their social power to impose their vision on a sort of unwilling middle American public. And so for us, the book is very much integrative and synthetic. It's about finding connections to be drawn between what happens in elections and what happens in government, and what happens in the parties themselves, and what happens in the rest of American society.
Well, many of our arguments will sound familiar to a global audience because there are these global changes. We're seeing increased educational attainment across democracies. We are seeing an increase in cultural liberalism across the democratic world, and we're seeing these big divides over the direction of society from those who favor the kinds of culturally liberal changes that are, and the kinds of technocratic changes that are brought about by increased educational attainment, and those who oppose them. But the United States has this very peculiar form of a two-party duopoly, a very strong two-party system where there are really no alternatives. So things that might materialize in other parties, in other countries, like a Green Party or a Liberal Party that would take in educated voters more concerned with culturally liberal issues, that has to happen within the Democratic Party in the United States. And similarly, the kinds of forces that push back against immigration, against cultural change, that might be attracted to a far-right party or an anti-immigration party elsewhere, have to make their way within the Republican Party in the United States. So a lot of what we are seeing is these global trends that manifest in this particular way in the US party system because there's only two options. And so the two parties have kind of been remade in the images of what would be kind of an alternative formulation in other countries.
What I think the major contribution of this book is that we really are trying, number one, we're really trying to make connections between areas of American politics that are often studied in isolation from each other. And so there are books and research on elections, there are books and research on policymaking, there's books and research on the media or business and politics or cultural trends and politics. This is a book about all of those things put together. And we really think that's important because sometimes scholarship gets, can get a little too narrow, or people really specialize in one area. And that's very valuable, and we draw on a lot of the findings of our professional colleagues all through this book. But where we see us making a mark is in putting it together and giving you the big picture. And in our view, the big picture is a really dramatic one. It's a big picture of major, not only political change, but social and cultural change over the past 40 or 50 years of American history and even world history. We think that in a lot of ways, the social trends that are at work in terms of revolutionary changes in family structures, in the role of women, in racial integration, in access to education, in acceptance of LGBT, politics and rights, in changing norms of how we communicate with each other and what words we use and what ideas we share. All of those things have really made American life very different in the 2020s from the way it was in the 1950s or even the 1980s. And we should expect our politics to reflect that change. And so what we really see we're providing to readers is an explanation of why we're seeing changes in our politics that maybe they have found surprising, the rise of Donald Trump, for example. And we're putting it in a context that I think makes it a lot more understandable. The other thing that we do that we're a little proud of, I'll be, I'll be honest to say, is we really emphasize clear and accessible writing. We try to write like regular people and not like academics. We want everyone to understand our argument and our evidence, even if they don't have an advanced degree in the social sciences. And we think that this is a topic that is of interest, not just to our fellow specialists in academia, but really to anybody who cares about what's going on in politics today, maybe is wondering where it all is coming from and why it's happening, has seen the changes over their own lifetimes in how Americans live and what the parties stand for, and is wondering what is behind it all. And so we're writing this book not just for an audience of our fellow scholars, but really for an audience of our fellow citizens. Another point that I think our book makes that you don't hear quite as much elsewhere is that the Republicans aren't the only party that's changing. There's been a lot of attention, both from academic scholars and from journalists and even from the public, on the dramatic changes that we've seen on the Republican side in the era of the Tea Party movement and the rise of Trump and Trumpism. And we're not saying those developments don't deserve a lot of attention. They do, and they get a lot of attention in our book. But one of the things we think is an understated argument that we try to bring out in the book is that the Democratic Party is changing too. It's not changing as dramatically. There's no huge single dramatic break with the past like the nomination of Trump represented on the Republican side. But we think that if you really need to understand American politics, you really need to understand what's going on in both parties, and they both deserve a lot of attention. And we think that, we are sort of providing an important sort of addition to the story by explaining how much the Democratic Party has changed from being the party of the white working class primarily in this country to now being mostly a party that's a coalition of racial minorities and college-educated whites. And even though there's been no particular moment where there was a huge schism or a huge break, there's been this steady evolution where all of a sudden we've wound up in a very different place than we started when you look at the Democratic side. And so we hope that this book provides a picture that's sort of equally informative for both major parties and explains how both of them have responded to the profound changes we've seen in American society.
Well, we are taking on what we think is the biggest transformation in the American party system in recent years, and one that has tremendous implications, not just for electoral politics, but for the role of business, for how we decide public policy issues, for who is an expert and who gets to make decisions in contemporary society. And that has real implications for how issues like public health and COVID and environmentalism and climate change and higher education are decided in our country and others. For us personally, it comes, I would say, from two paths. Number one, the academic path, where Dave and I wrote a book about the differences between the two political parties called Asymmetric Politics. And ever since then, people have been asking us about what's changed, how much has changed. And we think that quite a bit has changed, but not necessarily the things that people might point to as having changed. We don't think that the parties have at all become similar, but we think that how they're changing is in response to these same broad cultural forces. And then the other, I would say, is a personal evolution. Dave and I both have some family background in practical politics and in seeing the evolution of the party coalitions in our personal lives. And then we both live in academia at a time when academia is increasingly part of the culture war, has seemed to have to take sides in a debate between the left and the right in a way that it maybe wasn't prepared to, but might also be egging on. So another, I think, unique feature of this book is it is designed to take arguments from the left and the right quite seriously. The right has made arguments that the left has taken over our social cultural institutions, and we think that they aren't making up the trends. They just have pinpointed maybe more of a organized plan than should really be credited with this. And that instead what we're seeing is just once there's a change in the kinds of values and views of highly educated people, and we have social institutions which are overwhelmingly composed of those highly educated people, then they increasingly take on the views and the popular image of what today is culturally liberal and technocratic democratic views. And so we see ourselves as responding to some questions about the party differences that we articulated before, of thinking about our place in the political world as academics, which is changing fast, and then us thinking about what role experts can play in adding information to the popular debate, but recognizing that that role is a contested one in contemporary politics.
Well, one of the things I think that many people may find surprising or may not have thought of quite the same way until they read the book is the connection between the evolution of our party system and the evolution of American culture and society more broadly. And in particular, one of the things we emphasize, and we marshal a lot of evidence to substantiate this argument, is that in a lot of ways, American culture and society is moving in a predominantly liberal direction. The liberals are winning the culture war more than anybody else. And we don't mean that they win every election, because they don't. We don't mean that there aren't backlashes that sometimes actually move specific policies to the right, because occasionally there are. But if you think about, life in America, or again, frankly, life in almost any Western democracy 40 or 50 years ago, and the role of women, the role of LGBT people, the role of racial minorities, the role of religion, the role of traditionalist attitudes about family values or crime or popular culture. It's really a different world today than it was in the past, and it's a world that I think really liberals feel more comfortable in than conservatives do. And people on the left especially sometimes are so focused on the battles they have yet to win, and that not all of their dreams have yet come true and not all of their vision has yet come to pass, that they can sometimes be guilty of missing the extent to which they have prevailed in many of these respects, and that culture is moving in their direction more than it's moving in anybody else's direction. And I think that if you don't understand that, then you're probably going to be mystified by the fact that there are these populist conservative figures saying that things were so much better in the old days, saying that America's going in the wrong direction, that we need to make it great again, expressing fear about the future of the country, even the existence of the country. And that, to me, is something that really you need to sort of grasp in order to make sense of where both of our parties are and how both of our parties have changed over the course of our lifetimes.
Understanding the big liberal cultural moves that we've experienced over the past few decades also helps, we think, understand how both intellectuals and popular conservative and liberal commentators now talk about politics, and really how different it is. The left of the 1960s was not based on affirming the values of institutions like big media, large companies, universities. It was the right that was saying that we should preserve institutions. And when they saw left cultural threats, they saw them as peripheral, as people who were trying to change the dominant American culture, but really should be sidelined. And it's quite a bit different now. It is instead the Democrats, because of these liberal cultural moves, that have found themselves defending institutions like K through 12 education and higher education, even major companies as they have taken on social roles and major media institutions. And the rights critique has evolved to be not that there are these peripheral players who we should sideline, but that they are now the ones under threat, and that the entire system has been taken over by liberal cultural values that are now hegemonic and don't let their views be expressed. And we obviously think that that is taking it quite a bit overboard, but it responds to a real change, which is that there has been moves, especially in liberal cultural institutions, which have taken on the views of the highly educated as they have become far more prominent in American society and especially in the contours of power. So we think that not only should liberals recognize that they have won a lot in terms of the direction of culture, but conservatives should recognize that they have put themselves in this odd position where rather than defend traditional American institutions, they're now claiming that it's too far gone to resuscitate. The book sounds pretty serious, but there's a lot of fun stuff in here. We're following pop culture. There's Simpsons references. There's stories about major political figures in here. We try to tell these stories through data, but also through anecdotes and reflections and drawing as much from popular culture as direct electoral and policymaking politics.